So guys, it's that time of the week again. Welcome back to another episode from the Fantasy Kickabout. And this week it's slightly different compared to previous weeks, where this episode will primarily be focused on FPL content and to talk us through Wildcard Wednesday, as it's going to be called, is David O'Hara, as you would be fairly familiar with from other podcasts with the Fantasy Kickabout and through hosting as well. Dave is currently 46,000 in the world and goes by the name of the Unbearables. O'Hara, welcome back to the podcast and looking forward to chatting some FPL content with you today.
Thanks, Emil. Yeah, I always enjoy chatting FF.
So we'll just explain briefly to the listeners how this is going to work. So it's called Wildcard Wednesdays. So we're going to approach it in a way that we have a wildcard to use. Obviously, we don't know whether we're actually going to use a wildcard. We're still obviously debating that. But we're going to imagine that we have a wildcard every Wednesday and what 11 players you're going to bring into your starting lineup. So we've made a rule where, again, you can only pick 3 players from the same club, but you have a max value of 82 million. And the reason for 82 million is that obviously in FPL, you have 4 players on your bench, and normally you aim for players that are roughly 4.5 million, which that would leave us with 82 million of a starting 11. So that's the way we're going to go about it. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk, O'Hara is going to talk through his team, his reason and why he picked certain players for the upcoming game week 4. I'm going to do the same, and we're going to battle it out and see which team scores a higher points in game week 4. O'Hara, I will let you begin if you want to obviously start with your goalkeeper.
I'm starting off with Sanchez with Brighton. I actually have him in my team currently and have had him since the start of the season. He's usually a good kind of low budget enabler. But this week in particular, I think he's playing Brentford. So you'd expect him to at least keep a clean sheet. The likes of Ivan Toney seems to be a bit more lively for Brentford recently, so you'd expect him to have a few shots. So I think he's kind of, I would say, the best shout for a keeper this week. Just in terms of it's hard so far this season to predict which teams are keeping clean sheets. So that's why I went with Sanchez. Trent, I just think is just it's very hard to leave him out of the team. Just the chances he creates from defence, with also then the possibility of keeping a clean sheet if the team does. I just think it's impossible to leave him out with his attacking returns. I've gone with Luke Shaw then as well. United playing Newcastle. Newcastle, Callum Wilson's been ruled out injured as far as I know now as well. So a team, Newcastle, where you'd usually struggle for goals anyway, with really only kind of St. Maximin and Wilson, any sort of attacking quality. If Wilson's then not in, then I would expect United to keep a clean sheet. Even though I kind of thought that one, you would think on paper that one's a straightforward one. There's been a couple of games this season already where I had thought United keeping a clean sheet would be a straightforward thing. But in both of the first 2 games, even though they got decent results, well, obviously it was they still managed to concede 1 in both of the games. Rudiger I've gone with then with Chelsea. They're playing Villa as far as I'm aware this weekend, and just it's become pretty obvious since Tuchel has come in. Chelsea are just an absolute rock at the back. They concede very, very little. If James hadn't gotten sent off against Liverpool, he's definitely someone I would have gone for. even in terms of actually playing the wild cards, looking forward into the season, James has looked really impressive the first couple of weeks. So I think him getting the red card has changed, I'd say, the thought process for a good few managers in terms of which Chelsea defender to get in. And I've gone for fourth back then, so I've gone with budget choice, Irish legend Shane Duffy. I think of the budget defenders, I think he seems kind of, going forward anyway, in the short term at least, he seems kind of the most obvious option. You know, the first 2 or 3 weeks with Robertson being injured, Tsimikas was kind of the go-to 4 million, which is unbelievable. Like, as far as I remember, it's quite a long time since there was a choice of kind of 2 or 3 4 million defenders who are actually playing. You know, it used to always be, you know, you'd obviously have a 4 million on the bench who literally never plays, or like by the end of the season has 9 points or something like that, you know. So it's mad having the likes of Duffy and Tsimikas and also Livramento with Southampton, who's a good shout as well, kind of going forward. But yeah, I just think with the weekend again, obviously, as I said, with Sancho, Brighton are playing Brentford, you'd think they have a good chance of getting a clean sheet. And also obviously Duffy with his towering headers at corners and stuff like that, he might nick a goal then as well. Midfield wise is obviously similar to, I'd say, what people are going to have to go with, but also it's quite different to what I've had the last few weeks, in that there's no sign of Bruno Fernandes. He's got the boot at last, and obviously being a Liverpool fan, I'll take a bit of enjoyment seeing the amount of transfers out on him this week, because I think it'll be quite funny. But obviously that's to allow for a bit of rejigging of the squad. But yeah, so the premium player I have there in midfield is Mo Salah. I just find, like, obviously being a Liverpool fan, I find it funny almost sometimes in the conversation of, you know, what are you doing with your team, or which players are you trying to get in? Are you trying to get in Lukaku, Ronaldo? You know, are you getting rid of Fernandes? Salah's almost entirely out of the conversation because he's just such a nailed-on fantasy player. You know, like I was reading an article there the other day, and like that, it was, you know, how many of these premium lads can you fit in? But like Salah's almost an aside because he's just a given that you're going to pick him and one or two of the premium lads. Do you know what I mean?
We would always say that the unwritten rule in fantasy football would be to captain Salah. If you don't know who to captain Mo Salah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. So like, it's just a given that I'm picking him. Obviously Leeds can be a tricky game, but I just think Salah has started off the season well. You know, 3 games in, he has 2 goals and 2 assists, and he does usually start the season quite strongly. So I would expect him to continue it. Especially as well, you know, he's gotten the 2 goals and 2 assists, but he's missed chances as well, like as he always does, and that's something that he's criticised for sometimes, which I find ridiculous a lot of the time, because, you know, Ronaldo misses hundreds of chances. Like, any of the top strikers miss a ton of chances. You know, if you look at the amount of shots that Messi has, I'm sure he misses an absolute truckload. Do you know what I mean? But like, that then means he's more likely to score more because he's taking far more shots than everyone else. So yeah, so Salah's absolutely my team. With the fact that I'm slightly top heavy in terms of more expensive forwards, I have Rafinha and Ferran Torres as the other 2 in midfield. Obviously, there's this whole absolute nonsense that's going on with this whole Brazil thing, and FIFA telling them you're not allowed to play your Brazilian players, which I don't know how it's even a thing. Like, it's an absolute farce as far as you ask me. But as far as the most recent news I've seen on it, apparently it's looking a bit more increasingly likely that the Brazil lads will get to play. So obviously, from a Liverpool point of view, I'm fingers crossed for that, because the likes of Alisson and Fabinho are obviously hugely important players for us. But obviously that would then mean as well Rafinha should be fit to play against Liverpool. In terms of just taking a one-off wild card, you know, he wasn't necessarily one of my strongest choices, but at the same time, he's looked lively in the few games that he's played so far, and he's just the type of player that he can kind of drift in and out of the game, and then just pop up with a goal, you know. And obviously, as a fantasy football manager, that's all you care about. Like in the first week of the season, you know, obviously a lot of us would have gotten in the likes of Danny Ings. He literally didn't have a shot until his penalty in like the 96th minute, and then everyone's like, "Grant, happy days. Who cares if he didn't have a shot? He still got a goal and got me 6."
O'Hara saying that you fancy Rafinha to get a goal against Liverpool and maybe get rid of that Trent Alexander-Arnold clean sheet.
I don't know. I hope not. I definitely hope not. That one was one that I wasn't too sure on. In terms of, there is a couple of decent options that you could have. Say, currently in my team, I have Benrahma with West Ham, so I could easily have stayed with him. And to be honest, if I don't play my wild card, I'll be more likely to keep someone like Benrahma. But yeah, I just thought Rafinha has looked good the last couple of weeks. So if anyone is going to take away Trent's clean sheet, I think it's more likely to be Rafinha than anyone else. And then Torres, then just quickly on him, like he's looked very, very sharp the first couple of weeks. Obviously got 18 points in game week 3 after looking very close to scoring in the first couple of weeks. So I just think, especially having not gotten Kane, you know, City don't have any recognised striker other than Jesus, and Pep clearly doesn't seem to rate him. And especially if the Brazil thing does go ahead, Jesus just will be ruled out regardless, as far as I know anyway. But yeah, I just think he's 7.1 million as a midfielder, and he's playing as a false 9 for Man City, who are probably the most attacking team in the league. I just think it's a no-brainer, really. Even if it's only a short-term thing, you know, and if you were to get him in and you only have him for 4 or 5 weeks, and then a Pep Roulette starts attacking you again. But I just think he's the type of one, for that price, you're just better off having him, really. I think you have him, don't you?
I do. I was fortunate. I just took a gamble on him on game week 2. I took a Harvey Barnes, put Ferran Torres in, just because he was the most impressive player for Man City against Spurs. And like you said, O'Hara, he was playing the false 9. He had a couple of opportunities against a pretty decent Spurs side on that opening weekend. So I just said, similar to yourself, I can see him getting in goal scoring opportunities. And he is that type of player that just always seems to, like, I think, did he get close to double digits last year in terms of goals in all competitions for a guy that didn't play too many games? So took the gamble, and the gamble paid off. So I was pleased with that.
Yeah, that was nice when one of those gambles pays off. When you jump on the train before everyone else does, it's a nice feeling. That brings me nicely actually onto my forwards, and someone I've had since the start of the season, Mikel Antonio. So I'll definitely be sticking with him this week. You know, he's in absolutely the form of his life. Himself, Benrahma and Fornals are looking phenomenal attacking wise from West Ham point of view. So yeah, I think absolutely, why wouldn't you stick with Antonio? You know, like he's probably a captain shout for some people this week as well, playing Southampton. So yeah, I think I don't need to say much more on Antonio. I think he's a shoo-in in the form that he's in. The whole rejig of the team was all to facilitate getting in Cristiano Ronaldo. Yeah, he's back, and he seems to, before he's even kicked a ball for United, that you just can't not have him as far as the transfers in are concerned. So yeah, 12.5 million. But to be honest, I'd say he'll start repaying that quite quickly. You know, like he's just he's just a machine. Like even against Ireland there the other day, you know, unbelievable defending from Ireland for 99% of the game. You know, kept him quiet. He was still obviously having bucket loads of shots, dying to break that record. But like, he can still just pop up and score two absolutely class headers, where you're just like, oh, come on, like, what are we supposed to do with that? You know. So I just think with the especially obviously Newcastle this weekend, and that being the aim of the wildcard that we're currently doing. But even if you were doing the wildcard in the actual game, like his fixtures over the next couple of weeks are, I think it'd be silly not to be getting them in. And then to round off the team, then I've gone with Calvert-Lewin. Again, he's in great form at the start of the season, and even when he's not scoring, he's always in the box. The likes of Digne crossing in the ball and Tamari Gray, there's crosses flying into that box all game long, and he's one of the few kind of out and out strikers in the league he's just waiting in the box to poach in all these goals. I think as far as I saw today, there's a slight chance he won't play. I think he has a little niggle, but a lot of times these kind of ones, clear themselves up before the weekend. So I'd say at this moment in time, I'd go with Calvert-Lewin. So that's if I was playing my wildcard. That is the team I go with.
So I'll quickly run through kind of if I was using the wildcard for this specific week, what team I'd go with. In goals, I'm going to go with Mendy at 6 million. Kind of similar to yourself at Rudiger at home to Villa. Chelsea, since Tuchel have come in, keeping a lot of clean sheets, so I can't really see anything beyond a clean sheet for Chelsea against Villa. I went Varane at the back as my Manchester United option at 5.5. I'm just thinking, maybe this is me daydreaming, but a Varane Ronaldo goal against Newcastle, potentially a couple of the new boys getting off the score sheet. So that first and foremost, like similar to yourself with Shaw, I can see United keeping a clean sheet, like you said as well. Wilson with his injury, so Varane, I'd like to hope will have a comfortable afternoon at the back. Then my other options at centre or in defence, I went with Kieran Tierney, Arsenal. I know Arsenal have had a pretty shocking start to the season, haven't scored, conceded plenty of goals, but they're up against the Norwich side that have been leaking goals themselves. Kieran Tierney, again, he's probably Mr. Consistent at Arsenal. I can see Arsenal picking up their first win of the season and keeping a clean sheet, and Tierney at 4.9 isn't a bad shout. I suppose you could have went with maybe Ben White as well for at a lower price, but I'm going to go with Kieran Tierney. Next defender was Marcel at Wolves. Again, I just see their next couple of fixtures, even though we're focusing on game week 4, which is away to Watford. But again, Wolves have been unlucky in a sense that they haven't won or even scored goals so far in their couple of games. But I can see them picking up their first win. Marcel, I noticed it even in the United game when he was on that left-hand side, whipping some decent balls in. Just a pity that the Wolves attackers couldn't finish the chances or get into better position. So I'm hoping for maybe an assist and a clean sheet for Wolves and Marcel. Then kind of my kind of budget pick at the back, I went with Brentford's Pinnock against Brighton. I don't know. Again, you'd look at Brentford and Brighton. They both have decent attacking players, but they're not full of goals at the moment. So I could see potentially that being a 0-0 draw. That's why I went with a low budget 4.6 Pinnock. I know he increased in value as well. So that would be kind of my reason for going with a Brentford defender. Then into midfield, similar to yourself, O'Hara, Salah against Leeds. Leeds potentially do leak a lot of goals. If you have the likes of Salah, Jota, Mane running at that defence, you can see more than 2-3 goals in that game. I know it wasn't a 1-1 draw last season, but it was a really, really entertaining 1-1 draw, if I can remember correctly. Plenty of chances in the game.
Yeah. Well, the first game of the season we played them,
Yeah.
and it was 3-0 because that was the game. Remember game week 1, Salah got a hat trick.
Yeah, 4-3, wasn't it, Liverpool?
Oh, 4-3. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Liverpool won it.
4-3.
Yeah,
I was thinking
insane.
more so from playing at Ellen Road. Ellen Road on the weekend, isn't it?
Yeah, no, yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, it was just as you were saying it, I was like, oh yeah, that 4-3 game was insane.
Good as well. I actually thought that I actually didn't see that game live, but I saw the 1-1 game, which was pretty entertaining for a 1-1 game.
Yeah.
So pretty much the same reason as yourself. That's why Salah goes into the team. Next player I'm taking a bit of a gamble with, because we obviously made our teams early this morning. Son is potentially out with an injury, but I have him in the team on the basis of Crystal Palace away. Spurs have been very efficient. Son has been their main man. Kane will be pretty much back in the team after scoring during the week for England as well. So I can definitely see returns from Son in that game against a Crystal Palace that are kind of yet to kind of kickstart their season. So can only really see a good amount of Spurs returns in that game. Maybe I could be surprised. And again, if I was to look elsewhere, I probably will go with Jota for the same reason. Salah, Jota, Mane attacking that Leeds defence could be chaotic for Leeds and how many goals they concede. I suppose my next player is quite a differential. I was really, really impressed with him against United in Trincao, the nifty kind of winger for Wolves at 5.9 as well. And again, I can just see Wolves getting off the mark this weekend. I can see him potentially having some sort of a return, whether it's an assist or a goal. He was a threat against United. So hopefully he'll be able to do something similar against Watford. So he's probably my main differential this week. Up top, I got two out of the three similar to yourself, O'Hara, so there's no need to explain it, but similar to yourself, Antonio, if I had him in from week 1, and even if I didn't, I'd like to be thinking I would be getting him in for a game like this against Southampton, and I don't know what it is, but just anytime I see a team against Southampton, I almost feel like putting a player in just on the off chance they're going to concede 9 goals.
Yeah.
Or have a disaster of a game. So that's one of the reasons. I could have potentially gone with another West Ham player in the midfield, but I was more favouring towards Son with returns as opposed to the likes of Ben Rama, Fornals, Souček, and a few other West Ham players. Ronaldo, don't need to say anything else about him. Guaranteed goals, guaranteed returns for anyone that gets him in. Definitely a shout for captain this week. I suppose the question is whether he'll actually play or whether he'll actually start or not.
Yeah, that's the big one for me, really. Like,
yeah,
I'll probably hold off making any changes until maybe Friday, or until we've actually heard what Solskjaer is saying. Like if it's a case of, oh yeah, he's definitely going to play, because like that, obviously he seems someone you can't go without, but if it turns around and you have a 12.5 million player not playing, that's a serious amount of cash that's being unused.
Yeah, and I remember playing fantasy football years ago, and I was head to head with a guy, and it was a time where Ronaldo was tearing it up in the Premier League, and I went with Ronaldo, but whatever way he was able to work it around, because I think Ronaldo was 14 million or something at that time. He had Lampard and Gerrard, and he just pipped me on the purely because he had two premium players, and I just obviously as a United fan just stuck with Ronaldo, and he beat me by I think it was 11 points on the last day of the season, with obviously Lampard and Gerrard coming up with returns. But definitely a valid point that you could potentially get two other quality players or decent players for the same value as Ronaldo, and you could get double the points.
Yeah,
it's all to be seen over the next couple of weeks, but I think he's guaranteed to get returns.
at least you're not bitter anyway about the 11 points lost there 12 years ago.
No, man. Hashtag never forget, you know. So finally, the last forward I've gone with, again, is a bit of a gamble because of the news that we're hearing of South American players, but also Mexican players that could potentially be on that red list and not be allowed to play for their clubs this weekend. But I went with Raul Jimenez of Wolves. So that's a triple up on Wolves players for me. So I can obviously see them doing something in the Watford game. And Jimenez, he's dropped in price as well. He's gone to 7.4. But again, I almost feel like once he scores, he'd be kind of getting back to his best, obviously after his nasty head injury last season. I suppose I would probably take a gamble if Jimenez wasn't the start. I'd probably put, is it Fabio Silva, the young Portuguese
young lad, yeah.
striker? I'd take a chance with him by putting him in. So I suppose my team is very much a lot of kind of risk taken in that sense if I was to play a wild card for this specific week. But I also hope that when we're going through our teams, we might give any of our listeners kind of ideas or different takes on different players, or something like clicking, oh yeah, I forgot that player was playing. But it'd be nice to see how both our teams get on, and we'll obviously post our teams as well on our Instagram page. But just before we finish up, O'Hara, there's a couple of questions that came in from via our story today.
Yeah.
And I'll fire them at you if that's all right.
Yeah, fire away.
Let me have a quick look just to get them. There was one question in relation to, obviously one question was best captain picks, but we'll come to that at the end.
Yeah, cool.
One question was a double up on West Ham attack. Is it a risk moving forward, i.e. Antonio, Benrahma / Fornals? If you want to give us your take on West Ham at the moment and for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said there earlier in the podcast, I have both Antonio and Benrahma, and have had both of them since Gameweek 1. So I've been absolutely living for West Ham games these days after the Liverpool games. But yeah, I was having that same question as well, kind of in my head, being like, you know, obviously the two of them and also Fornals are in great form since the start of the season. But is that, you know, just the start of the season form and it's going to fall off the cliff kind of? But if you look at their fixtures, they have a generally decent run for the next while anyway. Obviously, as we said, they're playing Southampton at the weekend. They're playing United after that, you know, which is obviously a tough game. But you could still see them getting some sort of a returns. You know, West Ham are at home in that game. And then kind of from 6 to 10, Gameweek 6 to 10, they still have decent enough fixtures. So, as I said, I have the two of them. I'm going to stick with the two of them for a while anyway. I just feel you can look at the fixtures teams have, but you have to be looking at the form that some players are in as well. And I think the likes of those players are in absolutely the form of their lives. So yeah, I'm going to stick with the double up, and I'd recommend someone to stick with them as well.
I'd be 100% on board with sticking with West Ham players. I've had Antonio from the start. So like you said, you listed off the fixtures: Southampton, United, Leeds, Brentford, Everton, Spurs and Villa. And the United game is at home for West Ham, and they usually do score against United over the last couple of years. So you'll be nearly guaranteed that they will score against United. So they have a nice run of fixtures. So it's a thumbs up for keeping West Ham players for us going forward for the next is it, what do we say, up to maybe game week
Up to
10,
about
11?
game week 10 anyway, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Next question. Best midfield option around between 6 and 7 as a potential replacement for Bruno Fernandes. It's probably looking at something similar to what we've done by putting Ronaldo in, taking Bruno out.
Yeah.
But what, obviously you mentioned Rafinha, you mentioned Ferran Torres as well. Is there anyone else that you would see as a good potential replacement for Fernandes?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because like that, we're so used to trying to free up kind of a million here or there, where it seems, with the likes of Ronaldo and also Lukaku, the two of them coming in and being 12.5 and being such kind of, you have to have at least one of them. It's interesting to all of a sudden be freeing up such an amount of funds in midfield. But yeah, so as I said, yeah, I think Torres is a great shout, like 7.1 playing up top for Man City. I think you can't really go wrong. I've obviously said Rafinha and Benrahma as well. Benrahma's only 6.4. So I think if he continues his form, he's definitely a great shout. I had a look at a few other lads. Tamari Gray is another great shout. 5.6, and he seems like he'll be playing week in, week out for Everton. And I was just kind of looking at this week's fixtures. If Firmino is kind of has that little injury for the next couple of weeks, maybe Jota at 7.6. I know it's slightly more than between 6 and 7, but if you can free it up slightly, I think Jota would be a great shout to get in. And then just a slight little extra one, like I don't particularly rate him, but based on how the season has started to pan out, Dele Ali at Tottenham, I think, could be an interesting differential. He's only 6.5. He has played each of the 3 games, as far as I'm aware, at the start of the season. He's looked good. He has 14 points so far. So yeah, I think if you were kind of really constricted and only had 6.5, I think nearly, if you were someone to take the risk on him, I wouldn't, just generally because I'm not a big fan of him. But Dele Ali could be a good shout either if you wanted to have an interesting differential over people in your league.
I know that's there are a couple of good options. Dele Ali is a really interesting one because it seems like obviously Kane is back in the team, so he will be on penalty duty. So I think people might have potentially put at Dele Ali in, expecting him to maybe be on penalties. After obviously he took the last one, was it the Wolves game? I think he scored a penalty in. Just speaking of Wolves, like I'm just having a look at their fixtures here. So kind of game week 4 to game week 14 is pretty decent for them. They don't come across any of the Everton, probably the highest ranked team, Villa, West Ham obviously, but it's none of the top 4, top 5, top 6 clubs that they're facing from game week 4 to game week 14. I don't know. I wouldn't put my money on Traore as an asset in FPL. I think he's very inconsistent. What was it, 1 goal in 40 odd games?
I think that'd be a seriously dangerous thing to bet on.
Yeah, so that's why obviously I went with Trincao in mine at 5.9. He might be someone, if you're looking at a low budget to save a few funds to put elsewhere, i.e. maybe to try get Jota in for that extra 0.6 million, you could maybe get Trincao in for 5.9. Obviously, Watford, Brentford, Southampton, Newcastle are Wolves' next 4 fixtures. Could be a shout. Could also be a disaster. So pick what you want for any of the listeners that are listening in. But there are a couple of options from us. 2 more questions. Obviously, you touched on Tamari Gray there. We had a question in saying Christensen only at 5 million or Tamari Gray at 5.6. I know they're 2 different positions, but again, it could be that moving around players to get extra funding elsewhere. But just one thing on Chelsea, if I was recommending to get a Chelsea defender in, I'd be recommending it from, I think it's game week 7 to 12 for, again, to have a nice run of fixtures that probably quite similar to when Tuchel took over last season, where they picked up a lot of clean sheets along the way. I could see something similar from game week 7 to game week 12. Christensen at 5 million. At the moment, he's guaranteed to start, especially with Thiago Silva on that red list and not being allowed to play on the weekend. Personally, I'd probably go for Rudiger, like yourself, O'Hara, when you went with Rudiger for your Wildcard Wednesday team. But what's your thoughts on Christensen and at 5 million and Tamari Gray at 5.6?
Yeah, very, very similar to what you were just saying. Obviously knew that question was coming, so I had a look at Chelsea's fixtures. Definitely, I would say hold off until about game week 7. They have a couple of tough fixtures coming up. Obviously, Chelsea are one of the strongest teams in the league, so you can be like, oh well, they're obviously going to compete in the game. But usually on those weeks, you can have a strong player playing a really weak team. So I would personally hold off, but they do have a really good run of fixtures from 7 till about 14, really, and like, you know, they've United in 13, I think. So I think generally for that long of a kind of a mainstay in your team, I'd seriously consider doing it at that point. So even if it was a case of that run of fixtures was maybe going to start this weekend, I think I would still probably go with Gray. Just in terms of 5 million or 5.5 as a defender is more your kind of standard price for a defender. You know, it's only really 6 million, and then like 6 is when you're talking about a premium defender, where 5.6 million for a midfielder who's playing every week and quite likely going to get you attacking returns is usually unheard of. You know, if it's anyone, it's usually starting at around 7 million maybe. So yeah, I've been impressed with Gray since the start of the season. He was one I kind of was going to be keeping an eye on once they signed him. You know, obviously Benitez signed him, planning on using him, but I was wondering how he'd fit into the team. But yeah, first 3 weeks he's looked really bright. As I said earlier, he's one of the lads crossing in the ball into the box to Calvert-Lewin all the time. So I'd say he'll get an absolute rake of assists. So yeah, and Everton have a really good run up till about game week 10 or 11. So yeah, I'd go with Gray, and I think he'd probably be happier with the results.
So that's Gray in and Christensen not in at the moment for the time being, anyway.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I'd only really kind of consider a Chelsea defender from maybe game week 7 or 8.
Perfect. Final question then, O'Hara. Best captain picks this week. Give it to you. The last word, because I'm just going to throw it out there. Ronaldo for me has to be done. Ronaldo's homecoming. No other person to captain this week.
Yeah, personally, that's probably what I'll do as well. I think it's very hard not to. You know, the amount of people getting him in. I was looking at it earlier. 1.25 million people have gotten him in so far. You know, like that for transfers in 1 week, that must be some sort of a record. He also has a really, really good record against Newcastle. Obviously, going back to when he used to play for United. 6 goals and 5 assists against them in 11 games. So on average, a goal return per game. And, you know, he's still looking absolutely phenomenal. As we said earlier when we were talking about our wildcards, Newcastle just, you know, you wouldn't fear them at all. So I think Ronaldo is the go-to option. Obviously, then some people aren't going to have Ronaldo. So I had a look at a few of the other lads. As you said, you know, when in doubt, Captain Salah, I think Salah is a good option. You know, as we said already, he could easily bang in a few against Leeds, like he got the hat-trick last year. Antonio against Southampton, I think, could be a good shout. Again, given the form that he's in. I just think, yeah, that could be a really good shout. And then kind of a couple of outside shouts. If for some reason you didn't have any of those lads, which Jesus, I'd say there's barely anyone in the whole game who doesn't have at least one of those lads, if not two. Um, Lukaku against Villa or Son against Palace, I think could be interesting shouts. Again, obviously the Son one depends on whether he's declared fit or not. But if he is, I'd be much more likely to captain Son than Kane, just because Kane has seemed a bit rusty since he's come back. Obviously, there was the whole thing with City move. And yeah, Son has just been really lively. And then if you're one of the people who have gone Lukaku for 12.5 rather than Ronaldo for 12.5, at home to Villa, I'm sure you're almost obligated to captain if you're after spending that much on a new transfer. So I would go Ronaldo, but I think it's an interesting week where there's a lot of different options around the league.
Not sure if I agree with different captain options. I just can imagine if 1.25 million people are putting Ronaldo in their team, 1.2 million are probably captain him, I'd say.
Yeah, that's what I would say as well. That's why
Gameweek.
really I think it'd be impossible not to look for him or look at him if you've gotten him in. Obviously that's a huge amount of people who have gotten him, but there's almost 8 million people in the game. So there's obviously millions of people who don't have him as well, which seems bizarre because it seems everywhere you turn, people are getting in Ronaldo. But again, there's millions of people who aren't, active on social media or airing their opinions about fantasy football.
Yeah, put it this way. I was going to say you'd be a very, very brave manager if you captain someone else, Ronaldo blanked, and away you go with a captain's return. But O'Hara, thanks for joining us this week for our first Wildcard Wednesday. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in to Wildcard Wednesday. We're hoping to bring you this maybe every Wednesday just to bring you some value in terms of fantasy football, and we hope that it helps your team climb the ranks, whether it's in your mini leagues or the overall rank. And I suppose O'Hara made a best team win.